So hello everybody, and welcome to this session on balancing autonomy and standardization. I'm very happy to have all of you here today because what I wanted to share is a slightly orthogonal perspective to the beauty of engineering, right? But before I dive into the storyline, a quick word about myself. I'm the CTO of ING. I'm Swiss. I'm an engineer of the wrong sort because I'm a mechanical engineer. And I'm not old enough to argue that when I started, computers were mechanical. It was already past me. I joined ING a bit less than a year ago, and I'm in charge of everything that has either a chip inside or a line of code. Right? So I'm in charge of everything technology across software development, infrastructure, cybersecurity, across the globe, wherever we have presence and where we operate. And besides carrying that responsibility for everything with chip and line of code, I'm also the one to blame when it doesn't work. Right? So that's essentially the role. And the story I'm also going to tell you today is a story of size, complexity, and balance of freedom and control, essentially. Now, let's have a quick word about ING first. ING, large bank, neobank before neobanking was a thing. Right? We were digital before everybody else in Europe. So we grew very fast, very early, very nicely. And today we are on a mission to build the best bank in Europe. Right? Best defined on a number of parameters like Net Promoter Score, like ratings on the app, like essentially value and impact we are giving to our customers. To give you a sense of what ING is, a couple of numbers, right? So 40-ish, we are growing 40-ish million clients in about 100 countries, of which only a subset is retail. So the 3/4 of the bank is retail, the rest is wholesale. Hell of a lot of payments, right? We run towards 5 billion payments in a year with about 60,000 employees, but the core message is 1/4 of them are in tech. And in reality, it's a bit more because 1/4 are the internal employees, and then there is another chunk of about 5,000-ish of external contributors, right? So it's a unit that runs about 19,000 engineers. And why is that relevant for the conversation? Because so many humans generate a hell of a lot of complexity, right? And engineering is there to manage complexity, okay? So that's the first message here. Also very proud to mention the 50 plus repositories in GitHub. So it's a company with a profound tech culture and open source culture that makes itself visible in the community too. That's also the reason why we're here. You have seen a stage downstairs, you have seen people around. We are profoundly embedded in a way of doing engineering, not just in a way of doing banking. We also see a very large amount of microservices, about 2,000 in production, which is relevant because banks tend to have these monoliths, frequently mainframes, or still mainframe, but in a different environment. We went very early on with a very modern way of doing architecture. And the same on the engineering platform itself. You see a huge amount of deployments that we run every week. Of course, changes in production as such are, quote unquote, only about 200,000 a year. Right? So it's a bit less, but the usage of pipelines is particularly intense. Now, why the message? Size. Size, complexity, and the challenge of floating a boat that has a huge amount of energy inside, but also a huge drive in going all directions. Now, the world around us has been evolving massively. Of course, there is a lot of demand change, a lot of pressure, starting from the clients. If you project 15, 20 years ago, probably more 30, people tended not to have a real expectation to what technology has to be. Today, the universe has, because everyone is using Amazon, eBay, Facebook, you name it, and that type of usability and service level you get there is the one you expect to have everywhere where you interact digitally with an institution, be it a bank or be it whatever else. That is changing a lot the expectation. I mean, GUIs in magenta, green, and that we used to design as engineers, they're completely out. Pressure here to get a different level of digital services is absolutely there. The same expectations are not just customers, but also regulators. And regulators arrive a little bit later sometimes, but they do arrive. Take DORA, for example, the DORA regulation. Honestly, if you have been in infrastructure, those principles have been there forever. They just happen to become regulation now. right? And they take a different way. But that is changing a lot of the pressure that we have to face as an engineering family. By the way, if you listen to the points that we get in this conference, you see how this pressure is starting to, or is seeking for an outlet to unleash. Right? We had, there is, at the same time, there is a keynote on the socio-technical aspects of platform engineering. Is nothing else than a tentative to search for an answer to that pressure and that complexity lying around. And what I want to do today is to share where we are coming from, where we are, and what we are doing to try to balance out and to optimize this pressure for more different new speed with the challenge of managing the existing complexity we are sitting on. Okay? Good, so where are we coming from? About 9-ish years ago, ING was one of the I would say first large organizations that went the Spotify model. You might remember there was a big interest in Agile, the Spotify way, tribes and squads and the whole model. And ING took that leap of faith and went all in. So we essentially broke everything to the point that we decided to cancel ITIL. Can you imagine? Right? ITIL is a process, so forget it. We are Agile. There are no processes. We just have squads and teams, squads and tribes, and they are intelligent enough and smart enough to make it function. So we went to autonomous squads. We invested a lot in the full stack engineering mantra, right? If you are an engineer, a talented engineer, you can touch from front to bare metal, everything is yours. We went heavily in very short release cycles with local optimizations, right? And then we started touching a number of problems that we tried also to show here, is that every tribe started optimizing at their level, right? And this is where complexity starts to get a little bit out of control. Because exactly because we have so many talented engineers, everyone has a different opinion. And these are deep roots. If you remember the Linux versus Windows discussions of many years ago, the same Ayatollah wars are existing today among squads, among teams, on subjects of choices on how to solve problems. In that universe, there was an emergent property, which was the one of platform engineering, where we started looking at that and saying, well, you know what? We need to have a dedicated platform team that creates the backbone on which all of the squads are going to develop and essentially operate. We went also down the DevOps track to the point that all squads have own ops people inside, but we saw the need of creating the transversal optimization layer, if you want to call it like this, or platform engineering platform. That platform is the one that allows us to, bring in standards, try to converge, and essentially create an integral layer across the organization to tame complexity. Again, remember that ultra agility brought us to extreme growth of complexity. How do we tame that complexity? Without falling prey of the risk, which is we went too far with Agile, let's go back. And the let's go back, we know what it happens, right? It's again workflows, it's again process, it's again 1,000 approvals through something, and it's again nightmare. Right? So how do we move from that point onwards? Which is a tricky thing, right? Because we have been trying multiple times. So we stop everything, say, wait, we need a standard, right? And it never happens. We get a standard, it's just an N+1 standard, and it's not really solving what we are here. Because the whole story is a story of freedom versus control. Right? And when you try to standardize something, you are essentially, especially for very good engineers, taking away degrees of freedom. Why should I follow your standards? I'm losing my leeway to do the things the way I like to do. Right? And that's a little bit the way engineers think and work and function. Right? So how do we balance that intrinsic tension? We went down the path where we say, well, there are two types of autonomy, right? There is autonomy inside the squad, and there is autonomy at the platform level. Or to turn the logic slightly, if you imagine a squad, full stack engineer from metal to front, and full ownership of the pipelines, and full ownership of the backlog. That's the extreme case of Agile. Now we are entering a phase where we are going to limit the lower part of the stack So there are components where you don't have a choice. You just take what is there. By the way, side note, it's the same engineers have to convince about that model are the ones that are running to go public cloud, where essentially you take what is in the box, right? So there is a little bit of implicit ambiguity, right, in that story. That's one element. The other element, and I will talk later, is on the pipeline, on the moment of deployment. Today we have a very large amount of pipelines, but there are, many of them are essentially designed by the tribes because they know how to do it. And you know how it happens, then you get 15,000 pipelines, they go in all directions, right? So control on the pipelines, and then a little bit of control on the backlogs. So let me dive a bit in the platform organization as such. Why is a platform organization for a company like us of central value? Well, first of all, because we are global and multi-country, which means lots of brains in very different places and distant places. We have hubs in Romania, we have hubs in Poland, in the Philippines, we have developers all over Europe. And if people are not together, right, there is a natural tendency of optimizing locally, but then going a bit all over the place. We also have a strong focus on clients, so we need to tailor our deliverables to the needs of the client. That can be different from country to country, right? So that's another need for having a platform organization. We took the gaming picture essentially to express also that capability, right? Gaming platforms, they are a standard framework on which you can, develop whatever type of games that you want to have. And the other element, and this is the last point, in that balance, autonomy versus control, there is a slight change in paradigm that we are trying to bring in, which is the following. Historically, there's a sort of dichotomy between it's either local and then you do whatever you want, or it's global and then somebody's telling you what to do, right? That has been creating lots of tensions, right? And lots also blockages and, philosophical wars, you're right, I'm right, no, I'm better, you are better, whatever it is. The solution we're trying to follow today is to say, wait a moment, you could call it an open source mechanism, right? Everyone can contribute to what is a global service because you separate the thinking, design, development of a service from its effective deployment and consumption phase. It's two different things. It does not have to be the same thing. It's even, more conducive to the organization to converge brains into a global service that fits and suits to everybody, right? So that's the element which is so crucial behind the platform organization that we are setting out. There is a sort of flag or a mantra that we are taking around platform organization, which is the ultimate goal of our engineering is to deliver frictionless or seamless digital experiences at scale, right? Our 40 million clients, of which more than half are primary, which means we are the bank and nobody else, they need to have a completely smooth digital experience in everything that they are doing. And that consistency is not just a functional one. So forget about UX, right? When we say about customer value, when we think about customer value, there is also an element of dependability, of trust. Banking is trust business, essentially. So there is an element of, I know that when I need the bank for whatever reason, the bank is there. So there is a touch on availability, reliability. Behind that, or if you dive one level below, you start getting closer to the nature of engineering, right? And there is one, this is, I think, it's a GitHub formula that says, well, DX, or developer experience, is calculated by taking productivity, so how good, how efficient I'm in delivering, impact, how good are the things that I'm delivering, and how happy I am. So the happiness or satisfaction factor. All of this is brought to the power of collaboration, right? The more you collaborate with other engineers, the better your DX becomes. Now, that's the bright formula for DX, but here comes the challenge. That's not enough. In the tech family, we are sometimes challenged by our colleagues in the rest, in our case of the bank, because they feel we look too much at ourselves, right? So where is what comes out from tech itself? And for this reason, we went one level beyond, and we say, well, wait a moment, there is another factor to consider, that customer value is developer experience times reliability. And reliability is a boring factor. Eh? Reliability is not the next fancy framework, the next super programming language, the next super API you can consume or SaaS or whatever you want to have is not Gen AI. It's not Gen AI. This is fancy 1970s technology principle. You remember RAS, right? For some in the room probably. Right? So now that's a core challenge. It's a core challenge because it requires us to start looking beyond just the feature, the functionality of the technology. And let's face it, tech is reputation business. If this one is not okay, you can forget about doing philosophy on DX, right? In the conversation, with the world around tech, if reliability is not there, I can assure you by experience, no one is going to listen to you on anything strategic, anything like zero, right? And then you risk even more to lose the right of contributing in strategic terms and then let organizations slide into the Christmas effect, right? I see this Gen AI thing, I want to buy it because I lose my problem, I solve my problems, right? That gamification of technology in the wrong sense. I buy a tool, I buy a toy, and I solve a problem. Now, to avoid slipping in that role where tech is just a place where I can dump the new cool toys I'm buying and I just solve my problems, we need to work on this one. Utmost reliability is table stake, is a precondition to stay at the table. If you take the two, developer experience and core role of reliability, you merge them and you get to what we call engineering for impact, which is our, let's say, engineering transformation journey or platform, which is more platforms, more time to engineers for real value creation. So don't waste time in rereading useless documents or finding out where to connect dots or what to bring in and what to do. And also don't worry too much about controls. Right? You remember the famous approvals, there are nothing else than controls. We are a regulated industry, so there is a hell of a lot of controls. Now, controls are essentially bureaucracy, let's face it. Right? Now, in our engineering for impact, we are going towards invisible controls. So we are embedding controls in the workflows, in the automated workflows, in a way that you happen to respect controls, not because you know or want, but because you have no choice. You might remember, I don't know how you learned coding, I did it the hard way, so compile, get syntax error, try to understand where it was wrong, right? Same logic. A pipeline has to be able to spit you back if you don't respect the controls, right? So that logic is something that we are bringing into our mechanisms. Cognitive load, at our scale, and I think this is also the reason why ING has something to say at QCon, because what we are bringing is size. So we know the problems that technology can incur at scales that are essentially very large in people, in technologies, and in world. Guardrails. I was talking about invisible controls. We have a very strong engineering culture at ING, but so strong that engineer feels anything that limits my degrees of freedom is insulting, right? Because engineering, right? And the message I'm trying to give is, look, you're like a Formula One pilot. Of course you drive 350 or 400 kilometers per hour, but I assure you, you do respect the guardrails. They are there for your own protection, right? Again, remember, table stakes, reliability. If you don't have this one, everything else is optional. If we just hit the guardrails in a dumb way, we are breaking the chance of providing or showing what the impact is. And now you would say automated workflows, yet again a process, right? Yet again something to fill, click next, apply, and it's ServiceNow or is Oracle, whatever you have. It's not what we mean with this, okay? Now, so point one, to remember guardrails. Point two, productization. Again, we are engineers, so we like to cope with complexity. It's just our lifeblood. At the same time, we notice that our developers, our engineers more broadly, expect to find in the office the same type of experience they can find privately when they use digital platforms, but also when they use GCP, AWS, or Azure, or anything else of your taste, which is essentially a usability that is way higher. It's a tech that does not require explanation, right? I need to name one. I need to open an API channel to somebody. I don't have to figure out in 40 places how to do it, right? It has to be easy to find, easy to consume, which requires our own products to be productized. It's not enough to tell you, yeah, there is an IDE, download a plugin, and find out people who can tell you how to work. Right? So you need to guide an organization towards what you want to have, because a lot of smart people with big brains left alone all over the place. Right? So we need to help the organization converge. And self-service is an answer to that. If you think, I've been using one of the 3 public cloud providers privately for long. The beauty of that thing was that everything was there, documented in a way that was completely understandable, first time right, mostly, right? So that usability, it's part of our of the journey to create a platform. And then what I mentioned, community. Here the whole point is, large organizations tend to become hierarchical. Do what I tell you to do. Right? And as an engineers, first of all, we are allergic to that. Right? It's just the way we are built, first. And second, if I tell any one of my engineers what to do or how to do it, I have no clue what the real problem is. I have 0 clue. Right? So I cannot be dictatorial in asking the details. There is something that emerges from the community. Right? And that applies engineering management, but it applies also on designing services, on defining standards, on planning for convergence, because we sit on so much complexity that the intimate knowledge of all the intricacies is only available in the community, and we need to be able to mobilize that. Now, mobilization is not open bar. It does not mean, hey, we have a problem here, who volunteers to come and solve it, right? There is an element of operating model behind that requires us to allocate clearly who owns what, and also set limits. And here's the first, I wouldn't say unpleasant, but definitely slightly change message to the engineers. Forget about the full stack engineer, right? You are a half stack engineer. No, I will never say it like this. But the point is we are specializing engineers. You will get platform engineers. They work on the engine behind. You get engineers that develop components. And then you get engineers that develop things for clients. Right? And none of them is full stack. Full stack is okay for a startup, is okay for a small to mid-sized company. We have three engineers and they have to do everything, is fine. But at that scale, full stack is just creating unnecessary complexity, which, again, reputation brings everything down to a point where you're paralyzed, you're too expensive, too much run, and no one believes you because systems keep crashing because complexity, right? Now, the community aspect is one of the things that you cannot force. You can only create the preconditions to make it happen, but you have to say, or we decided to select a number of points that become, call them choke points if you want, or call them, points of control, where all that freedom gets to a point where rules apply. What does it mean? I mean, if I look at the engineering practice, everything I just said is, fancy and cool, but what does it mean operationally? Well, our platform is built on a number of we call them modern engineering practices, a developer portal. You would say, oh, cool, another portal, right? It's the 14th standard that we had before. Infra and architecture as code, and that as code is one of the core elements, because the moment where your standards become code, they are much easier to maintain. By the way, we're also starting to move towards risk as code, or risk telemetry, if you prefer. Right? So that instead of reporting to, in our case, to the regulator, a gazillion risk metrics for the technology, we monitor them. Opinionated pipelines, not the 15 pipeline where I have my own pipeline, it's my conveyor belt, I designed it, it does what I tell him to do, but opinionated ones. If you go there, if we doesn't like it, you go back, right? And what we call the golden path. So let me, again, go one step inside. Developer portal. About 16,000 unique users per month are accessing the developer portal. So that's the place where our colleagues find everything about our shared components. And it's a place where engineers essentially go to get access to what they need and what they take. It's something we already have. The Forge and Backstage are converging now into one thing. And it's massively used, which is a precondition, again, for scalability and for convergence, because the moment where everyone is getting to the single place, then you can start thinking about a frictionless engineering experience, because you know how to lead and how to get there. There is a curated entry portal, so it's not just a place to dump things. It's not GitHub in its negative sense, where you get a gazillion projects. It's more an Apple, an iTunes or App Store, if you prefer, where coders can find what they need and what they can work on. So that's one of the elements of this platform engineering principle. The other one, we have agreed on a number of shared standards on what we call well-architected framework, which is a blueprint on what do we define as a good application or a good architecture. Because architecture is one of the things that, as long as it stays in PowerPoint, is essentially, it draws future, and then you hope that your engineers will follow you. And it doesn't ever work, right? So we have architects that keep inventing futures that they never materialize. So we took the other way. We say, well, the well architecture framework is code essentially, right? So we can apply to pipelines and ensure that what gets into production fits to the architecture standards that we are looking at. Today, about 40% of what we call the critical business services, business meaning banking business, payments or things like this one, about 40 of them are already certified around this framework, right? Because it's the framework that gives us the highest probability or the highest chances of achieving the reliability that we need to have. Docker's code. Some of you might be familiar with LaTeX. This is LaTeX on steroids. Right? So it's essentially a platform where our coders can treat documentation for whatever artifact or whatever service or whatever is there to consume as code in an automated way. Why this is so crucial? Because documentation, again, and I'm taking AWS because I use it myself, but think the level of documentation you get on public cloud providers platform is just outstanding. It's coherent, it's logical, it's updated, it's relevant, it has everything it takes. And the problem, the challenge with documentation, it has to be maintained. If you don't maintain documentation, no one is ever going there. The famous RTFM is there because the moment where it's more time to read than to try to help to solve the problem, you just don't go there. So we went down this route that allows us to get consistent and clear documentation under control. King roads. So the long story is we have a large amount of pipelines free, so to say, right? So the 15,000 or more. Now we are starting to introduce what we call the King's roads, which are pipelines opinionated. So when you commit, either pipeline likes you or not. And if pipeline does not like you, you go home. You fix and you come back and you make yourself, appreciated by the next run. Now, why is that so relevant? Is because this way, I can keep a better control on what gets into production, first. And second, I can close that continuous learning cycle, because when you get an incident in production, usually you find out what the kill chain was. Without opinionated pipelines, you don't really have a way of avoiding those type of things to come back in production again. Right? So that's a core element of closing that loop of learning. King's Road is one. Golden Path is the other one, together with templates. And I know it becomes a bit convoluted, but the whole message is King's Road are just the pipelines, opinionated. Golden Path and templates are one level above. Right? So a Golden Path is really it's the whole orchestration of the templates, Terraform or whatever it is, and the pipelines to ensure that end-to-end the engineer gets what it needs to get. Right? So I want to open an API to you. I don't have to figure out which VLAN you are in and what the name of your API is and how to reach you and what the parameters are and get the certificate and then. That's Golden Path. It takes care of all the aspects. Right? On this one, we are, of course, at the beginning because it takes time to converge and it takes a lot of convincement. If you are an engineer with your own pipeline, why should we get to the opinionated one? And if you go to the opinionated, why do I have to spend time in creating golden paths and templates, right? The why was a couple of charts before. We saw that the level of change-related incidents in production reduces dramatically the more opinionated the pipeline becomes. Because let's face it, we are all very smart, but at that level of complexity, it's half a microsecond away from breaking things. Right? And opinionated pipelines are there to protect us from that risk. I go towards the conclusion of this story with a long discussion we had in the team around this statement. Right? So the initial statement was, success of the platform is not how many members are forced to use it, but how many choose to use it. And I disagree with the statement, right? Because if we make force versus choose, we remain a sort of, I say with all the love of the world, Woodstock of tech, right? Free love, everyone can do whatever they want, and it's okay, and great things happen. I'm not there, right? Because everything I said before, because if we don't manage a certain degree of balance between autonomy and convergence, complexity is going to sink us to the ground. So we agreed then on how many like to use it, because we are creating, I would say, not forceful methods, but sort of an unavoidability of the platform, right? Meaning, for example, if you use King's Road, you know the level of controls you get are embedded in pipeline, you can go faster to production compared to if you use a normal one, or even if you use nothing at all, right? So the key around the platform here is really the one of, it's sort of a statement, hey, engineers, let's strike a deal. You give me a little bit, you give me back a little bit of your autonomy, and in turn, I give you the satisfaction of solving even bigger problems in a smarter way and at scale. Right? So the deal here is give away a little bit of your local optimization, local autonomy to make something bigger. And that's why, and this is the concluding word, that's what we are working on. Because we are currently crafting towards becoming the most scalable engineering culture, not the best. I mean, best engineering culture can mean different things in different places. I'm a 3-people startup. Best means something else than a 20,000 people place. Right? So here is the most scalable one. And I liked a lot a statement I heard before on culture being the operating system of teams. Right? If it is like that, the proxy, then platforms are the kernel. Platforms are the kernel. And by the way, the Linux kernel, right? Not the Windows one when you let CrowdStrike coming in and do havoc, right? So it's platforms are the kernel, and it needs to be protected as such. Okay? So stay in the user space, engineers, and let a subset of engineers design our platforms that you can use and facilitates life for everybody. Side note, it requires, of course, from platform engineers to be outstanding, because if your kernel is crap, then operating system doesn't go anywhere anyway, right? So, and that's my final word. I think we have a little bit time. I count with about 10-ish minutes. If you have any questions or comments. 15, so luxury. If you have any comments or questions that you want to make, yes? I'll stay with this one because it's...
Hi, thank you very much. Amazing presentation, and the way how you delivered it was perfect. Thank you. Question, given everything you said about the complexity and the need to go half stack, as you said, yeah. What qualities you see in your engineers to grow to the engineer manager level? And to me, more important, what would you expect from engineer manager, line managers to grow even further? Yeah. Yeah. Does the framework you delivered anyhow influence this?
Yeah. Look, engineering management is a tricky role because on the one side is the one that has to do the bridges to non-engineers. So you need to be able to tell stories, right? And I'm not saying oversimplify, but create that credibility that what you're doing is right on the one side, needs also to be able to get the best out of your engineers, because you will never solve the engineering problems that are on the ground at any scale, right? An engineering manager is not there for that. And requires knowledge of that, or a capability of building on your people. At the same time, and that's the tricky part, how can you keep learning without doing things yourself, right? Because let's face it, at some point your engineers will come to you with things that might or might not be true, right? And not because they're lying, but because things move around. How can you judge? And that ability to keep judging requires a different learning pattern, because it's no longer learning by doing. I don't know about you, I learned that way, right? Now it's a different learning. Now it's more learning by smelling, right? Because you get to conferences, you see things and say, you park it somewhere, and then next time that somebody tells you, I don't know, I cannot do this because NFS is not encrypted, you go Google and maybe you find out that, no, maybe there is an encrypted version, right? But then you know what to search. So to grow into engineering management is more a journey in building your own mental model on how the engineering family works, and then you can navigate.
Thanks for the great talk.
Yeah.
You mentioned sort of King's Roads
Yeah.
versus Golden Paths.
Yeah.
Which, from your experience, would you recommend prioritizing or focusing on first?
Yeah, it depends a bit where you're starting from. If you just have, I would say, if you don't have pipelines at all, pipelines, just to start. If you have pipelines, but everyone has their own, then it's King's Road. Because then it is, let's start activating the controls that you have on pipelines. Because mostly they are there, but they're only in warning state. Right? So you commit, you get all of the warnings, you trash it, you go prod, and you crash prod. Right? So get to the opinionated one where some controls become sharp. You don't miss a control, you go back. If you want, you can explore with SRE logic, right? When you introduce error budget, SLI, SLO, the whole story. But that's, it is incremental, right? So pipeline first, then make controls sharp, then go SLI, SLO, SRE, and then go golden path and templates, where all the elements of your system start ticking together in a giant clockwork. So if you just aim for this one without starting from the basic, it doesn't work. And then last comment, you need to have, there is a sort of impossible sort of engineers on the platform engineering, which is engineers that have on the one side dev capability, to the extreme, on the other side ops sensitivity, and non-functional requirements are a different beast. They are not. Plus the ability of doing trade-offs between the immediacy of solving a problem and the long-term solution of a problem. And that dilemma is an infinite dilemma, right? Because I want to go fast, yes, but you have to think future. That's the platform engineering people side of the story. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I wanted to ask, when speaking about platforms, are you referring to like infrastructure level stuff, more technical level stuff, networking, security, or also maybe something more functional, closer to the business, when it's good to draw a line?
Yeah, phenomenal point. So it's higher. Of course, infra is the easy one, right? Because a container is a container. Don't tell it to the infra guys, right? They have different opinion, but essentially infra is easier. When you go up, then you go into the microservices space, then you start becoming, and here again is the challenge of managing complexity, because if you don't draw the line and if you're not explicit on where do you expect convergence and where not, you end up with a zoo of microservices because every squad designs their own because it's faster than consuming or finding out who else has one. There is a point though where, and this is, if you take the Aussie layers, the higher you go up in the stack, the more it becomes complicated. And this is where then you require to have a maturity in the business conversation, which is a different one. And I'm in the lucky position that ING has been so long so digital that my colleagues in business have a very high level of sensitivity for this, right? So, we all carry our injuries of trying to create, a one core banking system for Europe. And then you hit a wall because all countries are different and it doesn't work. Now we have reached a situation where business is willing to consider what modules of their enterprise architecture have value in being standardized. In banking, for example, is one thing that's MDM, master data management. Our client data are in one single platform globally. And why is that necessary? Because the lower the layer, the more the standardization conversation is among us, right? Do you take, OpenShift or take something else? We can sort it out. The more you go towards business functions, the more we cannot decide alone. Because when we say one single master data management, I can assure you there are a long list of people on the business side that wants to tell you why it doesn't work or what it should have or what not. Right? And that is where the discussion stops a bit. Platform is a part of the answer, though, because we also have to move away from the ambition of I define the standard and the organization will follow, which is a bit of the engineer sickness, right? If I build something cool, everyone will use it because it's cool. And it never works like this, right? It has to be something that the governance, not in a bureaucratic sense, but the nature of the behavior in the organization is leading into. Yes. Yeah.
It was a great presentation, thank you. You share with us a formula how you measure productivity, impact, satisfaction, reliability. Can you please give more detailed? What are the metrics that you measure in the day-to-day?
The answer is no.
But I really need to.
The formula was illustrative for the relation between things, right? Engineering productivity is a nasty beast, right? Because we keep getting confronted with, let's measure lines of code. Yes, in AI times, that's exactly the right measurement, right? So what we are trying and so the answer is really, I don't have of none of them. On happiness, a little bit, because we measure a thing which is called OHI, Organizational Health Index, that essentially measure the level of satisfaction of being in the organization, not just tech, all over the place. So this one we have. Value, indirectly, yes, because we measure NPS, we measure ratings in the application, we measure availability, we measure a number of things. But the problem here is more, me engineer, how do I link those grand KPIs to my personal life? Right? And here we are exploring, but it's very early, with a so-called platform operating model, where we are designing the whole bank around a list of digital products, some of them consumed by users, I mean, a SEPA payments, just a minimum, and some of them infrastructure, a container, right? And and map to the digital products, both cost numbers and revenue numbers, so I can have a productivity calculation. I can say, well, my mortgage product, Germany, has a total cost of 100 and is generating revenue of 200 last year, and next year is 300 revenue and still 100 cost, productivity increased, scalable tech demonstrated. We are not there yet. We are not there yet. Yeah, so there was one, okay, yeah. I'll just follow the microphone.
Yeah, I was just nearby, so I picked it up. So thank you so much for the amazing presentation. I have a question about the pipelines and how you look at them. So you talked about the checks that now will throw back any changes that don't pass the gates and so on. I was wondering, how do you balance the automated versus manual checks now in this scenario?
Yeah.
Do you still use manual verification of things before they go to production?
So the automated one have to be, the blocking one have to be the automated one. It cannot be manual. Because also if you look at, we do 15 million deployments a year, manual can't be. Which is tricky because some of the checks are not yet automatable. I mean, if you have to demonstrate you have a documentation with your architecture footprint, I can upload the picture of a deer, right? And no one is really checking it, right? So how do you cope with that? But we're starting from the basics. So I prefer to have blocking factors on things that I know I can check automatically and they are nasty. And then everything else I live with that incertitude. But it has to be automatic. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation, Daniele. I can actually confirm that King's Road is an amazing thing, and I already run a couple of pipelines in the morning. I wish all these pipelines at some point will automate all controls.
This is yeah, me too, yes.
You talk a lot about the platform thing, and I'm curious, don't you have a fear that at some point many or all engineers would love to become a part of the platform team?
Phenomenal. Right. Take Formula One, right? You have the pilot, you have the guys in the pit stop, they go on track only to change wheels, and then you get the guys in the factory, they manufacture the car itself. And it's very different personalities, right? So it depends who you are. There are people that like the thrill of being with business, being at speed, seeing revenue explode, whatever, go features, go front. There are people that are more clockwork engineers. They like the tick, 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 tick of this huge machine and the perfection of all the wheels inside, go platform, right? There are people that are, how can I say, more able to create community, probably stay in the pit stop, right? Because then you build bridges between the clockwork on the other side. So it depends a bit on personality. I understand also that platform is going to, so in tech there is one thing we need to avoid at all costs, is to create a caste system. And let's face it, it has been like this. I've been a lot in infrastructure. The food pyramid in tech was developers are lions, infrastructure is plankton, right? 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 Because that's what it was. DevOps has been changing a bit. But DevOps has been changing it sometimes for the wrong reason, because there is a dev-centric DevOps and an ops-centric one. The dev-centric DevOps is the one where devs are there and they say, okay, finally I got rid of this infrastructure folks because they have no clue. Give me access to the engine and I'll just do my own infrastructure. This was the bad full stack. And then you get the ops-centric DevOps, which is more of the SRE Google type of things, which is, hey dev, I like you, but if you botch my production, I'm gonna hit you hard on the fingers. Right? So it's a different way. And when we look at platform, that's a bit the convergence point of all of this. Is a point where everyone can have their own spike and also focus, ops for system stability, reliability. I didn't mention cybersecurity, same story, by the way. And dev can fulfill their need for speed, their need for, artistic, and I'm very, admirative of the statement now, of very elegant solutions to complicated problems. And then everyone finds a bit his own place in that ecosystem. Yeah. And by the way, that's why when they call it platforms as a social-technical instrument, they're spot on. We're talking about the human side of engineering. Hard to believe, but there is one.
Yeah, I had a follow-up question from him about the platform teams, because it has been endorsed by the industry, and the most big companies have them. But there's also already feedback that they say, then you're going to get the platform hell, because you have too many platform teams and you have to maintain them. People have to be aware what's happening. Yeah. So what's the next step in scalable platform teams, how to maintain them?
That's a bit the destiny of tech, right? So and there was the chart with the 15 standard. I think we need to have one single platform, and it's, really one globally, and one. I'm not saying one data repository because we have many, but one access to all of our data structure, and one convergence. And the other trick is, tech or engineering is not about building things. It's not about building things. It's about maintaining them, right? And the same applies, I was mentioning 2,000 microservices. Building them was the easy part, and we are all very proud that we built microservices. But if you don't get in a logic where we have to maintain them over time, keep complexity at bay, we're just going to see yet another layer of complexity. And then I see on the cost side, my run cost is growing and business is complaining because the change budget is not enough. Good. I sense that time is over. Yes. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the interaction and conversation. Feel free to reach out anytime, and happy conference to all of you. Thank you.